The reality is founding a company is going to be the most rewarding, most fulfilling thing that you ever do. But it's also going to be the hardest thing you ever do, the most challenging thing you ever do, and the most emotionally taxing thing you ever do. And having a network of like-minded people that are going through the same experience and can support you and challenge you and help you along this arduous but rewarding journey, I think is the biggest reason to join.
Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. Nathan Barry, CEO, founder of ConvertKit. Welcome, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you on the podcast. I feel like we had you on the podcast before, but maybe I should have checked this. I know you've spoken at SaaStock, but it feels like
I actually can't remember. So maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But coming up for SaaStock was really fun. Yeah,
exactly. Well, let's check those facts sort of later. But you did. I think, as you mentioned, come to SaaStock in 2017, I think it was.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So it sounds about right. Again, another good fact check, but it feels right. I remember the T-shirt because actually I'm wearing the 2016 T-shirt, which you probably can't see right now, and it's got the speakers' names on the back. And we did I think it was the 2017 one, which has got Nathan Barry on the back of it. And I think we just stopped doing them in like 2018 and 2019, which is a shame. But there we go. But when you did come to Dublin, which we're very kind of grateful for, ConvertKit was at 8 million, I think, roughly in ARR, according to the YouTube talk. And you
can trust what you hear on YouTube,
just kidding. Exactly. And now you're significantly a little bit, further ahead. I think soon to kind of cross 29 million. ARR and as a bootstrapped company. So congrats for that. And so we'll dig into that a little bit, like how have you grown from 8 to 29 in the last couple of years. But before we kind of really get into that, maybe some of our listeners have not heard of you before, Nathan. So tell us a little bit about yourself and like who is Nathan Barry, where you're calling in from. Let's learn a little bit more about you as a person, then as a founder, and take it from there.
Yeah, so I live on a farm in Boise, Idaho, so kind of northwestern United States. We've got 9 acres of land, like just kind of on the edge of town, like 15 minutes from downtown. So when I'm not like working on the computer building a SaaS company, I'm like doing the small farm homestead thing. You might hear like chickens or goats, yelling in the background or something. So it's kind of fun to have that balance between like high tech and, basically the way that a friend said it once is if you work with your mind, you should rest with your hands. Mm-hmm. And so I've always loved things like, building houses or construction or woodworking. You'll see things like I have this giant create sign behind me. Yep. That's a woodworking project that I did. That's what I do. My background's in software design and user experience. So I came to the world of SaaS, first from web design, then getting into like designing web applications. And then I loved iOS. I in 2010 got into that world and was like, the iPad was amazing. It was different interaction paradigm than what I was used to designing for the web. So I spent a few years there and then kind of came to the audience building space of like bloggers, podcasters, YouTubers, all of that. And was like, this sounds great. Like I'm going to go from being a freelance designer to like building my own audience. And then from that world, I discovered email marketing and was like, wow, this is amazing. It's driving all the sales for books and courses. But I hate MailChimp. And so then in 2013, that's where ConvertKit came from, was basically my attempt to build a better MailChimp for myself, but for, content creators, basically.
Very cool. And to unpack a couple of things there. So living on the farm, this is more a curiosity sort of question. As you mentioned, so you say 9 acres. You mentioned chickens, goats, like any other animals?
Yeah. Some years we have pigs.
Yeah,
we're doing like the whole regenerative agriculture thing, and so pigs are really helpful for like moving them around and turning up the soil and all of that. We don't have them this year. We just decided to keep it a little simpler this year. But
so is it an active farm in terms of like you sell livestock and produce, or are you living off the land, or how is it?
More the living off the land side of that kind of thing. My 7-year-old actually did set up a little stand at the end of our street, and he did that for a while. We also have like a fresh cut flower garden, and so that's fun. Okay. But it's very much a hobby project rather than it doesn't generate any revenue.
Gotcha. I did see, it must be like whether it's Instagram or social media somewhere, but you were building, like you said, you could do with your hands, so that you're building your own house or tiny house.
So I'm actually in a tiny house. For anyone who's like watched Netflix shows or anything like that, a tiny house on wheels. So it's like 8 feet by 24 feet. And that is my office. So my commute is out my back door, like across the yard. And then I've got this dedicated space set up. And
how long did it take you to build that?
I spent almost a year on it. Just like spare time, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was March 2019 through early 2020. So
very cool, very, very cool. And then moving on, and so you said you founded ConvertKit. You didn't like MailChimp and wanted to, create a better product, firstly for yourself, but then also, as you say, like mostly your customers, and you've got the big word create sort of behind you. Mm-hmm. Or certainly then the creator kind of like audience and sort of industry, is that still true to today? Like, are you just having are there like other SaaS companies who are not necessarily kind of creators that would use ConvertKit instead of MailChimp, or is it mainly the ICP is like you want creators?
Yeah, it's the whole range of things, right? Because now all the SaaS companies have discovered content marketing as well, whereas and so they are creators in that sense, right? And so they need email lists and all of that. We don't have as many, I think of like Barometrics and there's like a decent number of SaaS companies, but the bulk of our audience would be either someone just getting started, like, hey, I have 1,000 email subscribers, I'm just growing my podcast, or email newsletter, all the way through to, we have like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tim McGraw, and then a lot of authors, so like Tim Ferriss and James Clear, a lot of people like that, basically kind of the biggest solo creators are running million subscriber email lists on ConvertKit. And then we've had this big expansion into music the last 18 months, kind of with the start of the pandemic. We already had some music customers, and then that just accelerated a lot as they were all like basically put touring on pause and said, what do we do with our online presence? And we started growing pretty quickly there. And then we did our first acquisition at the beginning of this year, which was a company called FanBridge, which was email marketing for musicians. And so we bought them, and that brought over about 1,500 artists to the platform.
Cool. Very good. And so when you came to Dublin, like I mentioned, you spoke about using direct sales to bootstrap to 8 million ARR. I remember, and whether it perhaps was this conversation or maybe another, where you kind of talked about this, where I think like initially you were just doing inbound, but when you started doing outbound, you kind of realized that there was almost like an inflection point. Was that right?
Yeah. So I really, I came from the world of inbound marketing, of like from the blogger side of things, which there you're not selling a SaaS product, you're selling, or I was selling info products, ebooks and courses. And so I thought, great, this is working really well. It's a fantastic way to grow a business. Let me apply that to SaaS. And it just didn't work. And so what I found is that you have to, for inbound marketing to work well for SaaS, you have to already have product market fit. And when you try to do content marketing for SaaS before product market fit, you're just not getting the feedback. You're like, people are, clicking on your landing page going like, okay, that's interesting, I guess it's not for me, and hitting back. And all you see is like a visit that gets logged. That's it. Whereas when you do direct sales, you have conversations. Like if I'm like, hey, you should switch to ConvertKit, you actually have to respond. Like you as a human have to say like either yes or no. And if you say no, you have to say why. Because it's considered like socially awkward if you were just like to back away slowly and leave the conversation, like, and so that feedback is so important. And so, yeah, we really use direct sales heavily. First to recruit individual customers. And we still do it to this day to recruit like, the big name customers. Like an example would be Arnold Schwarzenegger of like working to get, hearing from his team over time of like, first just finding out who is his team, who's the chief of staff or who runs marketing for him. And then getting to know what are their goals. And we actually like first did a project with them a few years ago where it was more on the political side of like something that happens a lot in the United States is gerrymandering, where you like redraw the districts to make them vote like for your party, and so you get these crazy shaped like voting districts. And so Arnold was doing this big campaign against gerrymandering and to try to like get that to stop. And so we were able to get a foot in the door and be like, hey, we'll run the email list for that. And then, a year and a half, 2 years later, when he's ready to start his newsletter, which is wildly fun, by the way, if you go to schwarzenegger.com and sign up, then that's like actually a big thing with hundreds of thousands of people. And then that launches on ConvertKit because we help them out with a small thing. So we still use direct sales for those big influential customers. And then we also use it a lot for partnerships, like in the affiliate space, basically anyone who has a big blog podcast audience of saying, hey, like become an affiliate for ConvertKit, do a webinar with us, do a workshop. That's still a lot. But now that we have scale, like the inbound content marketing, paid ads, all of that works a lot better.
And I'm assuming as well, like, so let's say you got Arnold Schwarzenegger and a million people or whatever, may subscribe to his newsletter, and it's powered by ConvertKit. There would be some virality as well in terms of like, is it every time he sends out a newsletter or your customer sends out newsletter, you see this kind of like, new signups, right? Because people are seeing like, what's ConvertKit? And then they look to kind of like switch to that.
Yeah. So maybe 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we really started to put emphasis on the powered by side of things. We'd always had a paid plan from the beginning. And we didn't do the freemium model until actually 18 months ago. And so we didn't put the same emphasis on like powered by that I think someone would if they started with a freemium model. And so we had to sort of add that in later and make that more of a thing. Now powered by it like fluctuates with search as our biggest traffic source. Like they'll trade off month by month. It still converts relatively low. So like on a visit to account created conversion rate, search will do between 5 and 6%, whereas powered by will be between about 3%. So it delivers the same amount of traffic as search, but half the accounts roughly. But it's also free and just keeps growing. And so now we think about that quite a lot, where we might do a deal with a really big creator where part of the deal is that they specifically leave the powered by badges turned on in trade for a 20% discount or something like that. Because we're like, one of our core metrics is to grow that, because it's just like, it's free traffic that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so now 4 years later, from your 8 million ARR sort of milestone, you're now, let's say just sort of crossing 29 million ARR. I think about 68 team members worldwide. So there or thereabouts. And what, if anything, then has changed your sales, like marketing kind of a strategy from that period to kind of help you get to this growth? What are maybe some of the key things that you've done during this period? Given obviously like using direct sales was one of the key things to get you to 8 million, to get you to 29. Is it more rinse and repeat of what we're doing and we're just kind of growing? Or is there anything else that you've kind of added in that's really kind of helped?
Yeah, so the 8 million was the like pure scrappy numbers, lots of direct sales, lots of, you're just trying to piece together revenue from wherever, particularly probably the first 3 million, and then 5 million, like the next 5 million, it's like you're systematizing the scrappiness, I guess. And so probably the next phase is when we started to figure out, paid advertising, which we're honestly still not that good at it yet, of like I don't know if as a bootstrap company, we just don't have the same tolerance for payback periods that like I don't like a 18-month payback period on an account. Like that makes me uncomfortable. Whereas someone else might be like, oh, 18 months is phenomenal. Like, we're used to 36 months or, but we're using like funding it out of our own checking account. That's not the same level. I would say that a big thing that's really hit its stride would be our content marketing. We tried something, I'm trying to think when we launched it, probably would have been 2018, maybe 2017, somewhere in there. We launched an online publication called Tradecraft. And everyone at the time was putting out individual blog posts. And then, you'd have like 3 blog posts a week coming out, and you just sort of have this content machine. And we took a different approach, and we said, we're going to treat it like an online magazine, and we're going to do topic-based issues. And so once a month, we're going to come out with a new issue, and it's going to be like how to earn a living selling digital products, the complete guide to podcasting. And each issue is like maybe 6 to 8 like in-depth articles. And what that did is it gave us like substantial content, and it was really useful. It was free it was all free, but you could either download it as a PDF, to read as like a little ebook, or you could link to any one article and read them all, on the web. But I think it gave us a lot for link building because the content had a much higher perceived value. And you also had, instead of like trying to build links for each individual post, you're building links for this, like effectively a mini book once a month. And so it was like we had this launch that came out. And so we did that for 2 years and sort of built out our catalog. And then we would go back and just update and re-release. And we're like, here's the complete guide to podcasting. Again, 2 years, but like they're just like, oh, this is amazing. This is, people like memory is short. And so you just keep making the content better and do another round of link building on it. So that was a huge thing, and like search is our, either 1 or 2 for our traffic source. And it's largely because of that strategy.
But good stuff. And so trade with, did you say TradeKit? Was that?
Tradecraft.
Tradecraft. So Tradecraft. So have you kind of like, you're now just you've created all this content, you're just repurposing it, refreshing it. So no more like new content. It's just kind of like updating what you've done over the last
now
2 years.
We're back to doing new content again. So we found that balance. But one thing, like that original idea was that we would just work through the existing content. Because I think a lot of people sort of skip over what works onto the next thing. Like as founders and entrepreneurs, we're very used to like doing something, it not working. We're like, okay, next thing, that didn't work. Next thing, that didn't work. Next thing, that worked. Okay, let's do the next thing. That didn't work. And you keep going, you're like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
3 things ago, that one worked. And you're like, right. And I did the next thing. And it's like, no, but it worked. So like do more of that. And it's when the habit loop that you get into is trying new things and being comfortable with failure. You often don't know what to do with success. And so when something works, you might do it for a month or a year, but then you're still in the habit of like, okay, and what's the next thing that we're going to try?
Yeah.
Which is great if you can maintain the existing thing. But we didn't do a great job with that in some cases. Like our affiliate program would be one. Like it played a huge role in like a lot of growth. And then as we looked for the next exciting thing, instead of maintaining the affiliate program, we kind of let it go stagnant as we tried the next thing. And then you don't notice for about a year or 18 months. And you're like, wait, why is that driving the same amount of revenue that it did? Why isn't it growing in proportion to everything else? And you look back at your business decisions, how you staffed, any of those things, and you're like, oh, I see why. Like we took our foot off the gas there, put the same energy over here. And so I think now the way that I think about growth is try to really closely pay attention to what's working and make sure that any new experiments don't distract from what's working. Like keep the experiments going, but you have to be able to keep energy on, things like affiliates, content marketing, direct sales that have worked before, rather than always chasing a shiny new thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on the direct sales side of things, the team of 68. How big is the sales team? Out of interest, so we can give a reference point for those that are listening. As it as a bootstrap company.
Yeah.
It'd be good to know what and what the structure is.
Yeah, it's really small. It's 3 people.
3 people. Wow.
So we also never built out, and we never built out a traditional sales team. Like I remember probably about the time that maybe in 2017, that I was at SaaStock, and maybe like that 2016 and 2018 time period, I feel like everyone in SaaS was talking about the way that you build a sales team. And it was just like everywhere you turned, it was about building out like full, 20, 50, 100, 500 person sales teams. And it might've been because, you're also hearing that from people like Jason Lemkin on the SaaStock side. And it's a very traditional playbook. And we never did that. Partially because I didn't want, like, coming from the product world, I wanted like product driven growth. And then I'm not sure why else. Maybe it's because our average customer value is quite a bit smaller. Like our ARPU is $60, $65, and we definitely have the customers paying $1,000 a month or $3,000 a month, but they're the exception.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't lend itself as well to sales.
Yeah.
But I do wonder now, like, what would it have looked like if we'd built out like a traditional sales team in 2017 or 2018 and continue that momentum? So now we're actually like, of the 3 people on the sales team, 2 of them were just have recently hired. And so now we're actually building that out as a function.
And if you mentioned in terms of like, why did you created the company? Because you didn't like MailChimp, and you've created your own kind of product. MailChimp also famously sort of bootstrapped, and I mean, I don't know what the current revenue is, but I do right.
Probably 800 million would be
800 million. Okay, yeah. So pretty excellent for a bootstrap company. Do you foresee, and do you want, ConvertKit to, become as big a company? Is that what you're kind of trying to do here? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, and so one thing that I should be really clear on is I love MailChimp as a company and don't love it as a product. And I've actually had some fun times at the Inc. 500 conference. I got to sit down with Ben Chestnut. He was speaking that year, and I like emailed him. And, it was one of those things where he's like, hey, I'm checking out the hotel at this time, and I'm going to the airport at this time. Like, meet me in the lobby for, we'll chat for 20 minutes. And he was super generous with his time and all that. So I love the way they built the company, specifically the lack of outside capital, like making their own decisions, choices. There's so many things that are weird about MailChimp that I think were only able to do not because they didn't have outside capital, but because they could do whatever they want. And so, like, they could stay true and authentic to who they are without like needing to answer to outside investors. These days, I think there's so much capital available that like a company with good growth can completely raise on their own terms. And the investor's like, hey, you need to do this. And you're just like, no, because money is so readily available that I don't think investors have if you have a strong-willed founder, I don't think investors have the same level of sway or influence that they did, say, 5 or 10 years ago. But other things that I admire about MailChimp, in addition to them following their own playbook, is just doing it for a long time. Like MailChimp is a 20-year-old company. They've been doing this for a very long time. And so it's basically this case study in compound growth. And so I think about, okay, I've been doing ConvertKit for a little over 8 years now, and we're at basically 29 million. What does it look like if I do ConvertKit for another 8 or 10 years? And I think that a lot of people who sell their companies just do it too early. And I understand why. Like, I think we want to tell new founders like, oh yeah, it gets easier. Like, and some aspects of it get easier, but really it's just like the problems compound with the growth. Like, so founders get tired. They build something that they don't love. They have pressure to sell, any of those things. And so they opt out at some point. And I think that if you're continually listening to customers, continually evolving your product and, trying to stay on top of the market, that like, at that point, it's just like, I think that with those things, 28 million turning into 100 million is kind of inevitable if we give it enough time. I don't know if that's going to take 4 years or 6 years, 8 years, something like that. but that's inevitable with the right work. 800 million is probably a different level. So I don't know, but like we're definitely shooting for at least that 100 million ARR mark.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at another reference point. If you look at like Atlassian, I think as well, right? And now they're, again, I think again, it's probably Jason Lemkin like tweeting out about their valuation now, or IPO was 2 billion and now it's whatever it is, like something crazy. But they also kind of did a similar path, but I think did take some capital, of course.
I think it was all secondary. Which you're going to see more, like, I think Atlassian's capital pre-IPO was like $200 million of secondary. I don't think any of it went into the business, if I understand correctly. And now, obviously, with the IPO, I think they took primary capital, but it's pretty phenomenal. And like high valuations combined with, really founder-friendly terms, I think you're going to see a lot more founders like on their own path, either growing with their own capital or minimal outside capital, and then being able to sell like $1 million, $10 million worth of shares in a secondary transaction. That helps them to stay focused long term.
I'm sure you've had VCs knocking on the door, or not literally knocking on the tiny house in Boise.
That would be creepy.
Yeah. You probably received some emails, right? And but have you thought like, well, okay, you mentioned, well, you can see ConvertKit being a $100 million company, but obviously your own terms doing it maybe in the next 4 to 6 years. But what about, is there that kind of temptation that, hey, we can help you get there much quicker, and what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a decent amount. ConvertKit's a really quirky company, and it both serves us really well and causes some issues. So things like we have a profit sharing program where 60% of all the profits in the company get distributed to the team. We also have this ideal to build like a really high leverage company where, like, I think most $29 million ARR companies would have like somewhere between double and triple the team size that we do. And so we're looking to solve problems with code rather than more people, like, and build great systems. That's why you'll see us do things like focus on powered by and freemium and content marketing, because they're super high leverage as far as headcount. And there's just a bunch of other things like where we're deeply invested in the company culture, because that's what makes it the most fun. I think a lot of founders are focused on the outcome. Like, okay, if I can get to 100 million ARR, then I can sell this thing for $1 billion, and then I can relax and have fun. And when you have that mindset, you're willing to put up with a lot of nonsense on that journey, right? Because the destination is all that matters. The journey is just like, look, 2 more years, 3 more years, like we'll suffer through it. And I've always taken a different approach of the journey is the thing that we're optimizing for, and the destination is like the byproduct. That's the fun thing. And so with that mindset, I always have to make trade-offs to think about, if I take outside capital, is that going to mess up the journey? And so having a relatively small team, high growth, high profits, like that's the way that I like to run the company. And I'm willing to sacrifice, like, maybe it takes me 2 years longer to get to 100 million ARR. Cause like we all had a great time and we all served creators along the way. And then also, the margins and everything in SaaS are so good that like we all live a good life along the way. And then, the other thing is that I own almost all of the company. I own just over 90% of the company, and the rest is owned by the team. And so, I don't know. It's a fun model, and I like being different. And so there's not really a desire to take outside capital to like do a traditional playbook.
Yeah, you're in a very good position to say, look, why, no real need to change. Is say, unless there was this sort of burning ambition to build a decacorn, probably not a unicorn these days, right, but a decacorn, right? And
yeah, decacorn is the new unicorn.
Yeah. But you mentioned company culture, like the importance of company culture for you to ConvertKit, and you're a remote company. And now we're seeing that obviously remote is now like the big trend, that like many SaaS companies that are being born in the last kind of year or so are becoming remote. And many companies, because of COVID, have become sort of remote or kind of hybrid. What tips can you give from, maybe being an OG remote company, kind of founder, to those that are now just building remote or find themselves in this remote world for the first time to maintain a good company culture? Because it is quite difficult, perhaps, certainly if you've not done it before, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's a very different thing. And so we have this umbrella of remote, and it's important to distinguish between remote first companies and remote forced companies. Because like now you see like every job listing, might have a city on it, but it's like, or remote, right? Because no one's using their offices yet, all of that. And a lot of people are having a really bad experience with remote because they're in a remote forced company. There's not these trends and habits that make for good communication. A few things that we do that are really helpful. Probably the first one is building a culture of written asynchronous communication. It just makes a huge difference when everything doesn't have to be a call. Like, for example, we have a few areas of the business that are struggling right now where they're just feeling hammered, a bit understaffed, right? And they're in that like whitewater churn kind of phase. And so Daniel, who's our director of customer support, he has been in that place, and now he's in this, like, his part of the business is running really smoothly. And so he just put out this amazing post in our internal, we use Basecamp for it, internal communications, basically talking about the whole arc and the changes that he put in place and how he went from this like whitewater churn challenging place to now like amazing response times, like high quality responses and all of that. And like he could do a whole presentation on it, but now like here's this thing that anytime one of our managers or someone is like really feeling that struggle, we can be like, it will get better. Like there's like here's an example of one of your peers who's gotten through it and can help you and all of that. So that's the first thing. I guess I have a couple like that's more high level, but maybe a few really tactical things. We do shared no meeting days. So Tuesdays and Fridays, we don't do any internal meetings, or at least any pre-scheduled ones. If you have like the two of you, want to jump on a call and jam on something or like pair program or whatever, like go for it. But what that does is it gives people more time for like deep focused work. Also, if you're a person who like wants to, or, needs to get camera ready. I'm a person where I get camera ready in 5 minutes, I take a shower and we're good to go. But like giving your team members the ability to say like, hey, on these days, you don't need to do the whole hair, makeup, like all like you can have a break from that. So that's been really, really good. And doing it on the same day matters a lot because then everyone has like, oh, Tuesdays and Fridays are focus days. Another thing that we do is what we call SUPs. And it's a little bot that you plug into Slack. And what it does is every week it grabs 3 people at random and says, hey, you're going to have a SUP, which is just a 20 or 30 minute call, like get to know you call. And it assigns one person. So it'd be like, Alex, you're in charge this week, figure out a time. And so in a 60, 70 person company, you get into a lot of silos. And so we just have this bot that breaks the silos because it grabs people at random and pairs them together. It also makes the point that, a trio is kind of always unique. Whereas like if you and I were always a pair, we might have fallen the same patterns of conversation. But if we add a random third person, it's going to be a unique conversation. I think 2 other quick ones. We made it's the ConvertKit Team Stories podcast. It's an internal private podcast, and it's just team members interviewing each other on their life stories. Like I've worked with people on the team for 5 years or more, where when I heard their podcast that, like of their life, I learned so much more about them in that 45 minutes while I was out on a run. So we do that a lot. It's basically a lot of things about connection and understanding. And the last one is we have another little bot. We call it the weekend bot. And it pops up on Monday morning at 9 a.m. and says, what'd you get into this weekend? Like share a photo. And you get these little like peeks into people's lives of like, oh, there's their kids, there's their dog, that's what they're into. Like, oh, they go hiking every weekend, that kind of thing. And so having a bunch of those things sort of change the staleness of remote work and replicate some of the best parts of in-person water cooler type life.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing there. And great to see. I haven't heard too much about internal podcasts and the use of that. So
you're going to see those, like that's going to be a big trend. They're going to be really popular soon.
Yeah. No, definitely. And talking about podcasts, you launched your own podcast. I think sort of recently. Was that the first time you've ever done your own podcast?
I did a podcast back in 2015, maybe. Like did a season of it. I don't know, 12 episodes or something like that.
Yeah. Because I know you used to do like video blogs or vlogs and stuff like that. I think you tried to.
So I've experimented with a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
But what I realized is the podcast is really the best way to like meet new people and make connections. And so starting an interview show is just like, oh, these are all the people that I want to meet. Like, let me, the like, hey, can we jump on a call and meet? Sort of has one level of appeal as a pitch versus, hey, will you come on my podcast that goes out to, 25,000 people on my email list? And like, and people are like, yeah, sure. And so that's why I've enjoyed doing it. I think I'm 20 episodes or so into the new podcast. It's a lot of fun.
Good stuff. And so like, is that more like Nathan Barry, as a brand, or is this tied into, I mean, perhaps inevitably it is, but, ConvertKit, what is the strategy kind of around that? Is it, as you say, just during the pandemic, I just wanted to kind of connect with some people and, here's a kind of way to do it?
Yeah, it's a mix of both. There are some places where as a founder, you can have more connection and publicity than you can as a company. And so it's something that I'm still trying to figure out, but like when to be under the ConvertKit umbrella and when to be under the like Nathan Barry brand. An example would be if you wanted to get on TV, like traditional television, I don't know, like Good Morning America or what, I don't even know television shows, but let's say you wanted to be on sort of that circuit. Doing that as a SaaS company is really hard, like unless you're on like business specific programs. But doing it as a book author, that's pretty normal, right? James Clear comes out with Atomic Habits and they're like, yeah, great. Come on CBS, talk about it, put your suit on, come in our fancy little like living room set and talk about it for 10 minutes. And so there's things where when you fit into that natural pattern, like by coming out with a book as a founder, right? Then you might be able to get a level of publicity that you can't otherwise. And so I think the same thing, like ConvertKit's podcast versus my podcast. In that case, I think I'm able to build better connection with people individually. But then it ties back, right? The podcast is the art of newsletters. And so it's all about like interviewing people that I want to know who have big newsletters, in the email space. And a bunch of them have, so like probably half the people I've interviewed are already on ConvertKit. And the other half, I want them on ConvertKit. And so that's a great way to start that connection. And it all ties back to direct sales because I actually had this conversation with Seth Godin maybe 4 years ago or something. I was asking him how I should get more authors on ConvertKit. And he was like, well, what do authors want? And I was like, to sell more books. And he's like, yeah. So what can you do, to help them sell more books? Like build a popular podcast and interview them and drive traffic. And, and that's way more compelling than like, hey, will you chat about switching email providers? And so basically using that as a foot in the door has been not like crazy revenue driving. I'm not like, look at this 4 million ARR tied back to this specific strategy, but it's been really good for building the network and bringing over like key creators.
Yeah. It's definitely certainly. I mean, but podcasting, well, the SaaS Revolution Show, which we're speaking on now, actually existed before SaaStock, but it kind of really helped me, like get on calls, conversations with people like yourself, and then when it came to the conference, it's like, hey, all these people I've spoken to, I'm inviting you to come and speak at the conference, and kind of over time, that's been really useful and really kind of helped me build out like a great network of people and give sort of credibility and so on. So that's been very beneficial for SaaStock. But I've seen a lot of SaaS companies and like founders certainly have an approach where they look like, who are our target customers and let's create a podcast, invite them on and see how that kind of works, as a kind of almost like a Trojan horse type thing, but then give up on the podcast kind of idea, like, 3 months kind of into it, because they realize it's quite hard work, it's a long game, right? And not everybody is kind of, cut out for that, I think.
Yeah. And you have to do all of this for like, set kind of a 2-year time horizon minimum. Like, you're allowed to decide if this worked and is worth doing after 2 years,
Yeah.
And we want to evaluate whether it worked and is worth doing after 2 weeks. And it's like, no, you don't get to do that. Like, in the world of SaaS and audience building and all of that, we're playing a game of like compounding leverage, and you can't check whether your compound growth happened after 2 weeks. Like, that's not the way that compounding works. Unfortunately, it's the way that human nature works, but you just have to break that habit.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just conscious of time, Nathan. So, final 2 questions. What's one piece of advice or one valuable lesson you've learned from growing ConvertKit that you can share with the listeners?
Yeah, so ConvertKit's been around for 8.5 years, and I think a lot of people maybe saw like the overnight success stage of ConvertKit. We went from 2,000 MRR to 100,000 MRR in 12 months. And then the next 12 months was 100,000 to 500,000. And so it's just like this hockey stick growth that everyone wants. But no one really ever saw the 2 years that it took to get to the 2,000 MRR. And so it's just that, I have a friend, his name's Sean McCabe, who his company actually is called Daily Content Machine, and they edit and like produce my podcast and all little clips and all of that. But he has this quote. He just says, "Show up every day for 2 years." And that's kind of where the like keep doing this consistently idea comes from, of like, you can't evaluate for like that amount of time. So whatever you're doing, whether it's SaaS or building an audience, any of these things that are like famously slow to get going, just make sure you set your time horizon long enough, that set it at years rather than weeks or months. And then like, you really can't lose if you show up consistently for a long, long time.
Great advice. Definitely, again, like something we subscribe to. And let's say, like, if you look at the SaaS Revolution Show, we're 6 years in to doing it, right? And again, I think like not that many. There are a few, but not that many have had that like longevity to kind of do it.
But it's the same like Gail Goodman's famous talk, the long, slow SaaS ramp of death. Like, it's just the same thing. This takes a really long time.
Yeah.
And so go in with that expectation.
Definitely. Final question, easy one. Where can people find you online, Nathan?
Yeah, so I blog at nathanbarry.com. Barry's BARRY. Basically any social network / Nathan Barry is where I'm at. Twitter is probably where I'm the most active. Definitely check out the podcast. You can search either Art of Newsletters or The Nathan Barry Show in iTunes, and it'll come up. And then if you don't already, go use ConvertKit. It's free to sign up.
Will we see Nathan Barry on TikTok?
I'm not on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's one. I don't know. I'm only 31 years old, but I feel like I look at TikTok and I'm like, I don't understand it.
Yeah.
They're too young for me.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one. But Arnold Schwarzenegger's on it, and he spots kind of all money, and he's got the team. But but yeah, an interesting one. But we won't go into it. But Nathan, look, thanks so much for your time. Speaking to the SaaStock community on the SaaS Revolution Show. Fantastic to see you go from 8 to 29 million, and we'll have you back when you're at 100 million. If not sooner, and to talk about that. But thanks so much, Nathan. Great speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.